military and logistics of today are based primarily off of the military and logistics that were used in the time of the Medes and the Persians. They developed much of the way that some of the ideas of how modern warfare is fought. With Greece, the bronze, we have the philosophy of today. Much of philosophy that we find today is based off of those original Greek philosophers. Iron, of course, that of the power of Rome. We see its progression in history, and we see that the laws and the governments that we have today, that of democracy, of many of the governments of this world, all use Rome as their basis. It forms the basis of their primary laws, not using direct Roman laws, but you can see the influence of Roman laws in the history and governments today. And finally, we have that the Rome was mixed with clay, it was mixed with weakness, and we saw that it stands as a whole at the end of the days. And so the image as a whole, the final picture that Nebuchadnezzar saw, was that of Babylonian thinking, Medo-Persian military logistics, Greek philosophy, Roman governments, and formed in the weakness having been introduced to those things. And so it forms a world that is Babylonian in thinking and a Roman basis, much of Rome existing in that world, having a great influence on how the world works at the end of the days. Well, Nebuchadnezzar saw this picture, he saw the image, he even saw the interpretation of it, but we're just going to read from Daniel chapter 3. I'm just going to read this out carefully. It's that in Daniel chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, whose height was 60 units, the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar, he has just seen this image. He has just had this dream and seen this image, and he places right on top of it, the next thing he does is he builds an image that is based off of it. He didn't build an image out in the desert just because he felt like it one day. He saw a vision, and he decided to build his own plans on top of it. And so Nebuchadnezzar's view of history was significantly different. He didn't see himself as only forming the thinking in history, a way of thinking throughout the rest of history. He thought of himself, of Babylon existing throughout history. In his mind, Babylon would endure forever, and so he directly creates an opposition to God. But he goes even more so. He introduces religion into the mix. We're not going to read it, but in Daniel chapter 3, he then tells the people the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that when you hear the music, you'll all bow down and worship the image. And so this image that he saw in a dream, that Daniel then interpreted for him with the power of God, Nebuchadnezzar then sees the same thing and says, I will oppose that image. That is not the way that history will go. But we, of course, know and trust that God causes his history to happen. Whatever man thinks and whatever Nebuchadnezzar thought would happen did not happen. Babylon ultimately ended as a power and was followed by the Medes and Persians and Greece and Rome right to the end of today. And so it is Babylon only carries forward the thinking of today. It forms a way of thinking that is in opposition, consistent opposition to God's ways, trying to set itself as something opposite or instead of God, in that place of God. So Babylon as a theme, it carries with it that same idea of anti-Christ, of being opposite or against God. All of these things that we've seen so far, that of Babylon, false prophet, antichrist, comes together in the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, the man of lawlessness, in certain versions describing the man of sin, reads us this way. 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 to 8, we read, Let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. It goes on to say that for the mystery of lawlessness is already already at work. For he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. Then that lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming. So we see a lot of the themes that we've seen thus far. We see the idea of exalting himself, displaying himself as being God. Those are the ideas of direct opposition, of opposing themselves to the way God's prophets would be. So he speaks as God. He's the words that he speaks are not the words that God would have him to speak. They're other words, opposite and instead of the words of God. We see that it is already at work. So Paul again in Thessalonians recognizes that this man of lawlessness, this man of sin, is already at work. It's existed throughout history. Finally, we reveal that there is a judgment. Ultimately, it will be God who judges this man of lawlessness. So we've seen then the idea of Babylon, of false prophets, of Antichrist, all really come together into this man of lawlessness in Thessalonians. So bringing ourselves, kind of tying together some of the points that we've seen so far. We've seen that the false prophet is linked to a thinking of Babylon. It's linked to Babylon, and it's existing as Babylon in a world of weak and strong, in a time when the power of Rome, the laws and governments, the strength of Rome is now mixed with weakness and become weak. So we see a Roman sort of influence in the midst of weakness, which can be characterized with how democracy essentially works. It's a weakening of the actual heads of governments. The governments of today are weakened because of the power of democracy. The people have a certain power over their heads. We have recognized and we've seen that it is a Christian system. It's already existed. It's coming out of the church. It's following from among the brethren, has developed into a false prophet, developed into a system that speaks words instead of God's words. It speaks its own words. We see that it's connected with the beast. It's connected with the political power of Europe. The woman sits on the beast. So we see that this Babylon power, this Babylon woman, is connected with that beast, with the political powers of Europe. And finally, we see that it exalts itself, the false prophet exalts himself to be like God. So he acts like God's representative. He supposes that the words that he speaks are God's words, when in fact he is speaking words that are not God's words. They are instead of God's words. If we then go to Revelation 17, it's where we saw the woman and the beast together, Babylon and the beast. We are identified with a couple of other points. So we're trying to bring together the whole picture of what identifies this woman, this false prophet, this Antichrist. So all those terms kind of come together. So we're trying to pick out the identifying points. So Revelation 17 and verse 6, we read that I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly. And Revelation 17 verse 18 succinctly says that the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. And so we're associated with blood, associated with the blood of saints. So it's a persecuting power. It persecutes those that follow God. And we're told that it is a great city. It's one that reigns over the kings of the earth. Revelation 17 verses 9 to 13, kind of looking at the middle of those two verses we looked at previously, we read, here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, and 1 is not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. The beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goeth to destruction. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose: they give their power and authority to the beast. So, looking at the fact that the woman is connected with the beast, we're told that the woman sits on top of the beast and that the 7 heads of the beast that she sees are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And it represents 7 kings. It represents the progress of time, because we see that among those heads, 5 have fallen, 1 is, 1 has not yet come. So we see that there's a progress of time that John would have seen that has progressed through time. And we saw that characteristic of the beast last week. We saw that chart that has the beast kind of developing into different forms, forming finally this last beast. Finally, we're told, looking at the beast, because the woman and the beast are connected together, that as part of the beast, the 10 horns are 10 kings. They have not yet received a kingdom, but they will receive that authority, and they will give their power and authority to the beast as a whole. So the identity of the woman and the beast together, this kind of looks like this. So we have 7 mountains, the 7 heads, 7 mountains on which the woman sits. 7 phases to that beast. There are 10 kings that give their power to the beast. And we know that the woman has persecuted those who follow Christ in spirit and in truth. She has the blood of saints with her. The woman is really essentially a figurehead to the beast. She sits on the beast, but it is not the woman actually doing some of the actions, but she forms the mindset and the thinking that determines what the beast actually does. And finally, we're told that the woman reigns over the kings of the earth. So we bring that together with the false prophet. So the woman reigns over the kings of the earth. She is a figurehead, just as Babylon is the head of the image. So with the false prophet has the thinking of Babylon. It exalts itself over God. It's linked to the beast. It's linked to the powers of Western Europe. It's Roman. It's connected with the beast and with the dragon. All those powers together form that final stage of Nebuchadnezzar's image, and it forms those 2 beasts that come out of Daniel's 4th beast, which we recognize is a Roman power. So it's Roman in its characteristics. We recognize that it has existed from the time of the apostles. It was out of the time of the apostles that the false prophet arises. It is a form of false Christianity. So it's coming out of the majority. It's coming out of Christianity as a whole. Finally, it declares that he speaks and he acts on God's behalf. So the words that he speaks are words that he declares are God's words, but in fact are not God's words. Finally, we're told that this is a great city. So we only know in history of 1 city that ruled over the kings of the earth at the time of John. And only 1 city was persecuting believers in Christ at the time of John. So we have to look back and we have to identify, what did John see? What city would John have recognized this? What establishment, what power would John have understood this to relate to? And really only 1 city comes up. It's the city, obviously, that is central to both the dragon and the beast, and that makes sense with the false prophet, that the great city is Rome. And so out of Rome as a city would establish that false Christianity. It would establish a system that declares to speak as God, but is in fact not speaking the words of God. And so we see established in Rome today, we see the Church of Rome governing over the peoples of the earth, establishing itself as really a head over the majority of Christianity. And so really in the next few slides, we're going to see some of the evidence of this, evidence of why we might connect this false prophet, this Antichrist, to the church that exists in Rome today. But really a bigger question kind of highlights itself, is that if the evidence is pointing this way, well then why? Why would God want to highlight, why would God want to point out in Revelation a Christian power arising in Rome that ultimately tries to speak as God, but in fact does not speak the true words of God? And so as we go through these slides, we're going to want to have that question kind of overbearing what we see is, why would God want to point this out? So first of all, the head of the Roman Church is exalted as God, in that he says in a letter of 1894, one of the later popes mentions that we hold on this earth the place of God Almighty. And he's speaking and he's saying that when it comes to the powers of this earth, when it comes to governing some of the affairs that go on, we represent God. We represent God. The Catholic Encyclopedia perhaps gives a bit of a clear example where where speaking about the role of the Pope in the Roman Church, says that Peter's authority is subordinated to no earthly superior. The sentence which he gives are to be forthwith ratified in heaven. So there are certain times when the head of the Roman Church speaks, that when he speaks, there is no earthly subordinate that he has to go through. There is nobody on earth that his words need to be ratified with. It declares that his words are forthwith ratified in heaven, so that he has the perfect approval of God and is exalted to that position at certain times. So it's not declaring that he